Charter Local Edition. Brad Pomerance here in the Inland Empire. We are joined today by Jennifer Merolla. She is a professor at UC-Riverside in political science. We have finished the conventions, and I want to speak with you about terrorism, one of your areas of expertise. I think it's fair to say that the Republicans focused more on the issue of terrorism than the Democrats. Is that your perception?
That was certainly my perception coming out of the party conventions, and it makes sense that they would. So the Republicans have long had a reputation for being strong on issues of national security, including terrorism. So that's one of the issues over which they're typically advantaged. The public tends to see them as more competent in dealing with that as an issue. And so, you know, it's in their interest of playing up that issue because they're perceived as more competent in handling it.
That being said, when you look at the issues surrounding terrorism today, there are spots where the Democrats can point where they can claim success. Osama bin Laden is gone. There have been terrorist attacks during the 8 Obama years, but more lone wolf type of attacks. And we haven't seen a 9/11. And so I'm wondering, is there a credibility there for the Democrats? In your mind, what does the polling tell you?
Well, there's, you know, you bring up many valid points, right? That we should expect that there should be some shift in these reputations because, you know, like you said, there haven't been that as many attacks, certainly not, you know, the huge, you know, attacks that happened during 9/11. However, reputations are very sticky. They take a long time to dislodge. And much of our research that we've been conducting over time, including during the Obama years, when we typically do studies where we have people read a newspaper article about terrorism. So we're just priming the issue in people's minds. And Obama never got a boost. Whenever we primed terrorism, even when it was close to the time when Osama bin Laden was killed, he did not get the same type of boost that we documented for George W. Bush when he was president. So whenever we did our studies during the Bush presidency, if people read about terrorism, they had higher approval ratings of Bush, they perceived him as a stronger leader, but Barack Obama didn't get that same advantage.
Well, let's talk about Mrs. Clinton, because it's hard to deny she has foreign policy experience. She was in the room when Osama bin Laden was taken out, I guess you could say. But then there's the question of the Middle East. Some would say it's on fire. Is it because of what George Bush did 15 years ago or because of what Barack Obama did in the last 6 to 8 years? Where does she come down? She's a woman, and I know that you've looked at that question.
Yeah, so Hillary Clinton faces a double bind in a sense, right? Because she's of a party that's perceived as weaker on terrorism, and she's female. And what we know from research on gender stereotypes is that female candidates are typically perceived as weaker on national security. They're perceived as weaker leaders, right? And those are the things that people look to, right, when terrorism is salient. They want a strong leader who will rescue them from the crisis context. So, but on the other hand, right, she has this experience as Secretary of State. And so we've done some research on this question. So we did find before she was Secretary of State, when we ran some of our research studies.
When she was running in 2008, presumably? Or
even
around
when
that
she
time?
wasn't running, we were just doing a study during a non-election time.
Got it.
She was just, you know, a political figure that's prominent. But when we primed terrorism, people came to have lower evaluations of Hillary Clinton when they read about terrorism. But that was before her experience as Secretary of State. We ran a study again in 2012. So this is, you know, she ran in 2008. She served as Secretary of State. So we thought, well, maybe this will counteract, right, any bias against her gender or her party. And the effects were weaker, but there was still a slight negative effect on her evaluations when we had people read about terrorism.
Even though the Republicans poll well when you look at questions of terrorism, I want to talk about one Republican, and that's Donald Trump. Because to some, he has made statements that aren't really in line with Republican foreign policy philosophy. For example, we're not necessarily going to defend our NATO allies. Or Russia, come hack into the DNC computers, come hack into Hillary Clinton's computers so we can find the emails. That doesn't feel very Republican. You know, Vladimir Putin, you're a strong man, keep the Crimea. How is that playing?
Well, I mean,
do we know?
We don't know yet. I mean, there's, you know, a lot of political scientists are, you know, collecting data as the election is going on because he is such an outsider to the Republican Party. You have prominent Republicans who sat out, right, the Republican National Convention. And we don't know to what extent that will play well with the base, right? There are certainly Republicans who are likely going to write in a candidate or won't vote in the presidential election.
Right.
However, at the same time, he is an outsider, and that's appealing to a certain
Sure.
segment of the American
Sure.
electorate. So he may mobilize some people who don't typically vote to the polls because they are drawn to his no-nonsense, right, just say what you think approach, right? That is appealing to some who maybe have sat out of politics.
A corollary to the terrorism question is the question of immigration. And I was compelled, and again, I'm not taking a position, but I believe that in 2015, 1 million immigrants from Syria and Iraq and the Middle East went to Europe. Of those 1 million, a grand total of 0 were involved in the terrorism attacks that occurred. But if you look at the media, it appears that they're all involved.
Right.
They're not homegrown, when we know that all of them are homegrown. Maybe one, maybe, but we're not really sure. So what's your sense? In America, we got to keep the Syrians out, the Iraqis out.
Well,
On this question of immigration
yes.
and how voters are perceiving the questions of immigration.
Yeah, we do
We'll
know.
talk about Mexico in a second, but let's talk about Middle East.
So about the Middle East, I mean, it's one of these classic things we found in our research is when you prime terrorism, I mean, people are worried, right? They do want to kind of circle the wagons, right? So kind of a candidate who's, saying, let's build a big wall, let's not let in any immigrants from countries that may be dangerous. It's a very safe approach in that sense, right? You're trying to make sure no one comes in, even, right, if most of the people that carried out these attacks were already in the country.
Right. Virtually everyone.
But people don't perceive it that way, right? They see images, right, on the news, like you said, of people that may be of Middle East background, and they just think immigrant.
But the flip side is America is, we are a compassionate people, I think. And, how does the demonization, if I can use that term, of Muslims, how is that playing? I mean, this is the first or second largest religion in the world. We go back to terrorism. I mean, is Donald Trump serving us well by demonizing Muslims? One could argue that only inflames the radical Islamists.
Well, and that is the claim, certainly, right, that the Democratic Party, has been trying to make, is that, it's certainly, for one, right, against our values, right, as a democracy. We welcome people from all different backgrounds. That's what's built our nation, right? So Democrats are trying to make that case. And the second, that it can, ISIS, right, some of their propaganda materials show Trump making these statements, right? So they are trying to make the case that we want to be welcoming because it upholds our values, but also because it actually makes us more insecure.
And let's talk about the border wall, because that's focused more on Latino immigration. How is that playing? What are you hearing in your polling, in your research?
Well, we haven't linked it too much yet to candidate evaluations. So that we still need to do a little more research to see.
Yeah.
But there is a perception, right, and we're starting to do some research on this. When you have the inflammatory rhetoric that we've seen this election cycle against immigrants, to what extent does that turn off not just Latinos, but other immigrant groups from the Republican Party, right? So to what extent may it just, create this situation where Republicans are having a harder and harder time appealing to non-white voters?
And think about California, which was really a purple, if not red state, until Prop 187.
Yes.
I mean, George, Dukakis, he lost California. It wasn't until Bill Clinton came along that we had, the Democrats pulling it out.
And a lot of those changes, so in that context, right, in these conditions of threat to immigrants and their families, it really mobilized Latinos to take part in the political system. We had high levels of naturalization. So I would expect that mobilization among Latinos especially will be very high given all the rhetoric.
She's Jennifer Merolla. I'm Brad Pomerance, Charter Local Edition.